Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is my custom vintage mini bike. Well, what's left of it anyway? Somebody has to go on a diet, and it's not going to be me. What I'm talking about is weight reduction. My biggest concern, constantly compressing this fork. With the mini bike turned around, you can already see I've begun to remove the torque converter. I have the driver and the belt off. Next, I'm going to remove the pulley and Big Bertha. There's reason too for you. This thing is burning belts like crazy. I tried it in the winter, and then I tried it in the spring. Got the same result. I would actually have to lift the engine about another 1/4 inch. That means I would have to take out these aluminum spacers and get something thicker. It's just adding more weight, cost, and who knows what else when that happens. I'm already pretty tight up top. Dude who built this thing was a real smooth operator. At least he was thinking about the next guy. I already have my cables detached, throttle, that's off, fuel line, tanks, they're out of there, pulleys off. The last thing holding our power plant in, the 4 nuts and bolts. So easy peasy. Next time you see that, it'll be up there. 1/4 inch or not, this little 196 was putting in work on both ends of this belt. Groove City. It's off the frame. You can see we have plenty of room for activities. I'm going to be cutting this gas tank mount off, so I'll pull the seat. I'm already loving it. I'm also already getting a headache. My angle grinder has been screaming in my ear since the day I put this thing on. Just like it never happened. Maybe I'll save this for a handle somewhere else. It's not raining yet, so I might as well clean this thing off. So now it is raining. I got this thing cleaned up, and I have a break in the weather. I'm going to get it outside, and I'm just going to hit everything that's bare metal with primer for now. I'm not taking this thing apart. I want to make sure this is going to work first. So, moving forward. While that's drying, we're going to arts and crafts land. I cut out a small rectangle of thin plywood. It's probably 3/8 or something. The original holes I drilled would have hit a reinforcement that I put in the chassis under the seat pan, so I moved them back. I drilled these out just larger than the hardware that I'm going to be using. I had a foam pad. It was like one of those ones that you connect together, just like that. I used my plywood as a template. I just held it down on top of the foam, cut it out, and did that 3 times. I went around the world a couple times, some duct tape just to hold them all together with the piece of wood on top. I just drilled out the foam, so now I have the same 4 holes. Just cut off a piece of the material that I'm going to be using. Left plenty of overhang. I rounded my corners on my plywood. Now I'm going to hit this with some primer. Now I'm inserting my bolts in the proper holes. Don't worry, everything in here is basically waterproof, so anything on the other side is definitely more waterproof than plywood with primer on it. Now the tricky part. I gotta fold this thing in, guy. Real basic. I'm gonna get after it. Make this thing look kind of clean if I can. Oh yeah. It was like that. And then some. It might look like a lot of staples, but I placed them sort of in the same areas. Tried to make it look as uniform as possible. That is going to be on the bottom anyway. Those holes have to get cut out so that our bolts can go through and hold this thing down. I know, how unorthodox. Let's see how this turns out. I just made some little slices right on the center of each one of the holes, and then made sure that the bolt is going to go straight through. I cut some of these little red squares out of the same material, and these are going to be used kind of like a washer. I'll get them in place and we'll take a look. I just trimmed the squares into circles. There they are, in the holes, sticking out the bottom. I got some nuts, and I think I'm going to see if I can find 4 washers. On the freshly primered seat pan, we have 4 of the same holes. Those match these holes. The long side goes to the front. This is the front down here. Wham bam blah jam. Check out those buttons, huh? Underneath, they come through. I have just a couple threads. Not to worry. I'm going to be going to the hardware store and getting 4 slightly longer carriage bolts. That way, I can double nut them. I can lock one up to the other one. That way, they can't loosen up. I cut some spacers out of an old piece of tubing I had. Looks like some kind of a high heat hose. And, well, I may have overshot it on the carriage bolts, but I have one of those rubber spacers smushed up underneath a washer, and then we have a nut, and then a lock washer, and then another nut, and a copious amount of thread. We'll see what happens. I'm hoping that with the down pressure, when I push down and tighten them up and squish the rubber up against the metal and then lock nut them together, you know, I'm hoping that that gives it just a little bit of play, but it's not in the metal itself. It would be in the material. You know what I'm saying? So when you sit on it, it pushes down and takes some of the tension off away from the head of the bolt. That way we're not constantly tearing at things. Is this the most comfortable thing in the world? Probably not. But that's not what we're going for this time around. The big improvement here is where our weight is distributed. We're now a little bit further, tighter over the back of the bike. That's taken a little bit of that constant downforce off of the fork. Plenty of room. It definitely looks different, but not terrible. We might as well go ahead and fill this void next. I'm just going to change the oil in the motor while it's out. Why not? And then I'm going to bolt it in. I'll leave it loose, but I get everything in place. That way it can't just fall out. I have my 4 bolts on. They're loose so that we can move this thing around. I took a chunk of 2x6, wedged it up in the front, and I think that's where I'm going to try to shoot for my spacing to set my jack shaft and retain as much of this foot peg real estate as we can. I have some new covers for these, so don't stress. Under here you can see that we line up with the oil dumper. We still got plenty of adjustment. Guys, things are looking up. When you sit on this, you have all the room in the world. I'm well away from the carburetor. It's way out down. I'm not even on the peg. See? So I'm digging it. Well, it seems there's another fat tuna in the koi pond, boys. We got to figure out how to gravity feed this carburetor without the tank tower holding us way up here. Our mount drops considerably. We lowered the motor down this way and laterally because we took those aluminum spacers out. So we made up for some of what we lost here down here. If we were to direct mount this to the side, we're going to be cutting it close. You see the bottom of that outlet and the top of that inlet. So even though we could probably pull it off, and when my considerable bulk rests upon yon seat, it would, dip back this way and assist gravity. In keeping things simple, I think I have an idea that might work where we can gain about an inch or so. I just found a nice light piece of steel tube that I had laying around. I'm not going to use it for much. Went for the length of the spun aluminum gas tank, and now I think I'm just going to hit it with some primer. Keep it from rusting. Now that it's primered, I'm going to start wrapping it with some red duct tape. Alright. I attached the red tube to the top tube of the frame with a couple clamps. Now I'm going to strap the gas tank to the side of this whole thing. I just strapped the gas tank to this double tube that we're working with. You can see that if I was strapped to just the frame itself, we would be that much lower. So let's turn this thing sideways where I have some room and see how we did. I'd say we gained about 3/4 of an inch. We're flaring up just a little bit where I chose to go to the back side of the carburetor and the throttle cable. If I bring it to the front, it comes down a little bit. If I change this to a 90-degree fitting, we'll gain about another 1/4 inch. So, for the time being, I think we're going to rock with it. I still have a throttle cable brake line to reroute, and the kill switch. But before we do those, I want to get this business taken care of. We have jack shaft and the clutch. You got to figure out where the sprocket's going to go and then space our clutch accordingly. Once I do that, we're going to move the engine to set the tension on the chain. My friend from OMB Warehouse hooked it up with a new clutch. I have a 10 tooth. We're going to be sticking with the 420 chain for now. I also have a 17 tooth sprocket. With the 17, a 10, a 54, and this 10, we end up at something like a 9.1 for the ratio. If we can make 7,000 RPM, top speed would be 33. So I'm hoping we can get 25 to 30, something like that. But at least we'll have a starting point to test this thing out. I'm going to be running the clutch with the sprocket on the outside. That way, when we put the chain on, we're not getting any interference from the swing arm bolt. I'm also going to be using a clutch guard. This one slides on over the bolts. They're going to be in these 3 holes. You can start threading those on, and then set the clutch, set the sprocket, the collar back on, put the chain on, set the engine, and then this will go behind the heads of those bolts that are there threaded in, and we tighten that at the end. I'm all hooked up. I took my Dremel and my micro disc and I cut out kind of like a diamond where my bolt sticks through. I could have spaced this guard out and then used a regular head bolt that you can access from the side, but this is my preference. I'm sticking with it. We can clean this up later. Smooth like butter. The fuel tank that went with this block had this bridge section that was bolted to it, and then that's what connected it to the block itself. So I just unbolted the bridge from the fuel tank, bolted it back onto the block, and I used that for a point to bring all my wires and cables together. It actually worked out really well. Over here I have the starter cover off I just used a 21 millimeter socket, ratchet, extension. I held on to it, and then I used a 1/4 inch on this side and tighten my clutch. This is not set at 54 foot-pounds. This is. So I know I'm not going to ming this up any when I'm bringing that home. I'm also not going over tight or using an impact on my output shaft. Throttle's hooked up. We're going to get an air filter on here. And maybe a few other things. Besides the overflow and the air filter, I couldn't find a thing. How peculiar. That means we're ready to test it out. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the next video. Because as always, it's a work in progress. Have a good one, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.